For 35 years, I built a fortune while raising my son as a single mother. I wasn't pursuing wealth to impress anyone, just securing our future brick by brick, investment by investment. My hands signed every school permission slip. My voice soothed every nightmare. I gave him everything: the best schools, a debt-free college education, the down payment for his first home. And then one Sunday evening, I overheard him tell his wife in the kitchen, "Mom's just the free help. Why hire a maid when she'll do it all for nothing?" Just like that, everything changed. No warning, no remorse. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Heart shattered and dignity in tatters, I made a decision that would stun them all 3 months later at our family dinner. When Thomas was born, I was 26 and suddenly alone. His father James had decided fatherhood wasn't for him, leaving nothing but signed divorce papers and a small settlement that barely covered 3 months' rent. I still remember standing in our half-empty apartment, holding my newborn son against my chest, wondering how I would possibly manage. But manage I did. I took the accounting degree I'd put on hold and finished it at night while working as a bookkeeper during the day. My elderly neighbor Mrs. Chen watched Thomas while I attended classes, accepting homemade meals as payment. We lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment where I slept on the pull-out couch so Thomas could have the bedroom. Every penny was accounted for, every expense justified, every luxury postponed. By the time Thomas started kindergarten, I had landed a position at Westfield Financial, a mid-sized investment firm where the hours were punishing, but the potential was limitless. I arrived first, left last, and learned everything I could about wealth management. The senior partners noticed. By the time Thomas was 10, I was managing my own client portfolio. By the time he was 15, I had become the firm's youngest female partner. Still, I lived modestly. We moved to a comfortable but unremarkable 3-bedroom house in a good school district. I drove the same reliable sedan for 12 years. Thomas never lacked for anything essential. He had brand-name clothes, the latest gaming systems, summer camps, and later, SAT tutors and college application coaches. But he never knew about the growing investment accounts, the property acquisitions, or the side businesses I was quietly building. "Mom, why don't we have a bigger house like Michael's family?" he asked once when he was 13, after visiting a friend whose father was a surgeon. "We have exactly what we need," I told him, "and we don't carry debt." I wanted him to understand the value of money, to recognize that wealth wasn't about displaying status, but about creating security and options. Perhaps that was my first mistake. Not showing him the full picture of what financial success actually looked like. As Thomas grew, so did my portfolio. I developed a specialization in emerging technology investments, placing early bets on companies that would later become household names. I funneled the profits into commercial real estate, municipal bonds, and eventually, my own ventures. By the time Thomas left for college, a prestigious university I paid for entirely, my net worth had crossed 8 figures. Yet I remained his steadfast support system. When he called at midnight with paper crises, I stayed on the phone walking him through outlines and thesis statements. When he graduated and landed his first job at a marketing firm in the city, I helped him navigate apartment hunting, professional wardrobe building, and the complexities of workplace politics. When he met Vanessa, I welcomed her warmly, hosting their engagement party and contributing generously to their wedding. When they struggled to afford a home in the overheated market, I provided the down payment as a gift, $250,000 that represented a tiny fraction of what I could actually afford, but that I presented as significant sacrifice on my part. I didn't want them starting their marriage with crushing debt, but I also didn't want to undermine their sense of achievement. They bought a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in Oak Ridge Heights, a neighborhood I could have purchased half of outright. At their housewarming party, Thomas proudly showed guests around, detailing their renovation plans. "We're so grateful for Mom's help," he said, arm around my shoulder. "She really stretched herself thin for us." I smiled and said nothing. I continued my routine of Sunday dinners at their house, arriving early to help Vanessa prepare the meal, though she rarely accepted my suggestions on recipes or techniques. I noticed her eyes rolling when I mentioned traditional dishes I used to make for Thomas. After dinner, while they relaxed with wine, I quietly cleared the table, loaded the dishwasher, and scrubbed the pots they'd left to soak. "Mom just loves taking care of us," Thomas would say when friends commented on my helpfulness. "It's what gives her purpose." For years, this was our rhythm. I maintained my career, my investments continued to grow, and my role in their life gradually shifted from parent to something more utilitarian. I became the emergency babysitter for their son Oliver, the holiday meal preparer, the house cleaner during their vacations. I accepted this evolution as the natural order of things. After all, I had raised my son to be independent. Wasn't this proof of success? Until that Sunday evening 3 months ago, when I arrived early for dinner and heard their conversation through the kitchen window that had been left open to the spring air. "Your mom called again about helping with the landscaping this weekend," Vanessa said, her voice tinged with irritation. "Just let her do it," Thomas replied with a laugh that cut through me like glass. "Mom's just the free help. Why hire a maid when she'll do it all for nothing? Besides, she needs to feel useful now that she's retired." I froze on the back patio, keys in hand, the homemade apple pie I'd brought suddenly heavy in my arms. Retired? I had stepped back from full-time work at the firm, but still maintained my client relationships and board positions. Free help? The words echoed in my head as decades of sacrifice and love crystallized into something sharp and painful. That moment changed everything. As I stood there, invisible to my son and his wife, I made a decision that would alter our family dynamic forever. 3 months later, I would reveal the truth at a family dinner they would never forget. That evening on the patio, I took 3 deep breaths and plastered on a smile before ringing the doorbell as if I had just arrived. Vanessa opened the door, her expression shifting from surprise to a practiced welcome. "Elena, you're early," she said, taking the pie from my hands. "We weren't expecting you for another 20 minutes. I nodded, keeping my voice light. "Traffic was better than expected. Hope that's not a problem." "Of course not," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Thomas is just finishing up. Some work emails. Can you set the table? I'm trying a new recipe and it's a bit more involved than I anticipated." The familiar request, always phrased as a question but never actually optional, felt different now. I moved to the dining room and began laying out their wedding china, the set I had gifted them that now only emerged when company visited. Apparently, I wasn't company. Thomas emerged from his home office 10 minutes later, barely glancing up from his phone. "Hey, Mom," he said, distracted. "Can you check on Oliver? I think he's still playing video games and he needs to wash up for dinner." I paused, the silverware heavy in my hand. Before, I would have immediately complied, grateful to be needed. Now, I heard the instruction for what it was, a task assigned to the help. "I'm sure Oliver can manage to wash his hands without my supervision," I replied. "He's 11, not 4. Thomas looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, resuming my task. "Just that he's old enough to handle basic hygiene." Dinner proceeded with the usual choreography, Vanessa presenting her carefully plated meal, an overcooked salmon with an overly complicated sauce, Thomas dominating the conversation with tales of workplace triumphs, and Oliver picking at his food while sneaking glances at the tablet hidden in his lap. I said little, watching them all with new eyes. How had I not seen it before? The way they spoke around me rather than to me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The way Thomas guided the conversation away from my occasional comments about my consulting work or community involvement. So, Elena, Vanessa said during a rare lull, I've been meaning to ask, would you be able to stay with Oliver during spring break? We're thinking of taking a couple's trip to Sedona. It would just be 5 days, and you know how he loves spending time with his grandmother. I looked at my grandson, who hadn't made eye contact with me once during the meal. Does he? I asked quietly. Vanessa laughed nervously. Of course he does. Tell Grandma how much fun you have when she stays over, Oliver. Oliver shrugged, eyes still on his hidden screen. It's fine, I guess. Thomas shot him a warning look. Oliver, that's not how we speak to Grandma. It's okay, I said, dabbing my mouth with the napkin. At least he's honest. I turned to Vanessa. When exactly are you planning this trip? The 3rd week of April, she said, relief evident in her voice as she launched into details about spa reservations and hiking tours. I let her finish before responding. I'm afraid I won't be available then. I have a conference in New York that week. The silence that followed was palpable. Thomas set down his fork with a small clink against the china. A conference? He repeated. What kind of conference? The genuine confusion in his voice confirmed everything. My son, who once knew every detail of my career, had no idea what I still did with my time. In his mind, I existed only in relation to his needs. An investment symposium, I said simply. I'm speaking on a panel about emerging markets in Southeast Asia. Vanessa laughed, a brittle sound. Oh, Elena, you don't have to make up excuses if you don't want to watch Oliver. We can find someone else. I'm not making excuses, I replied, my voice steady. I've been planning this appearance for months. It's quite an honor to be invited. Thomas's expression shifted from confusion to impatience. Mom, you've been retired for years. What investment symposium would want you on a panel? The casual dismissal, the complete erasure of my professional identity, struck deeper than his earlier comment about free help. In his mind, I had ceased to exist as anything other than his mother, his child's caretaker, his household assistant. I scaled back. I corrected him. I never fully retired. I still maintain certain client relationships and board positions. He exchanged a glance with Vanessa, the kind of look that communicates volumes between couples. It clearly said, humor her. Right, he said patronizingly. Well, if you can't do it, you can't do it. Maybe Mrs. Castillo next door can recommend someone. They moved on, seamlessly transitioning to summer vacation plans. No further questions about my professional life, no interest in what I had built or maintained. I was dismissed not just as help, but as a person with a life beyond their needs. As I drove home that night to my modest 3-bedroom house, the same home where I'd raised Thomas, I felt a heaviness settling in my chest. For years, I had cultivated this image of the practical, unassuming mother who lived simply and helped whenever needed. I had hidden my success to keep Thomas grounded, to ensure he valued work over wealth. Instead, I had made myself invisible, pulled into my garage and sat in the car, engine off, staring at the wall. Tomorrow, I would call my financial advisor and my attorney. It was time for a change, not out of spite or revenge, but out of self-respect and truth. It was time to be seen. The morning after that revelatory dinner, I woke before dawn. Something I'd done for decades as a working mother and continued out of habit. But instead of immediately checking my phone for messages or market updates, I lay still, watching the ceiling gradually brighten with the rising sun. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my loneliness. Not just the empty house or the quiet evenings, but the deeper isolation of being unseen, unheard, and unvalued by the person I had given everything to raise. I made coffee and carried it to my home office, a room Thomas had never seen in its current iteration. What had once been a simple desk with a family computer had evolved into a sophisticated workspace with 3 monitors, custom trading software, and a Bloomberg terminal. This was where I managed my empire, hidden behind the facade of a retired bookkeeper. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Hey, Mom. Vanessa found a college student who can watch Oliver during spring break. Probably better anyway since he's getting older and needs someone who can keep up with him. Sunday dinner as usual?" No apology. No curiosity about my conference. Just a swift pivot to another solution, followed by the expectation that our routine would continue unaltered. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I called my attorney, Marian Hamilton, a formidable woman in her 60s who had helped structure my more complex investments and property holdings. "Elena," she greeted me warmly. "This is unexpected. Is everything all right?" "I need to make some changes," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "It's time to restructure my estate plan and possibly my living situation." Marian was silent for a moment. "That's significant. May I ask what prompted this?" I found myself telling her everything. Thomas's comment about the free help, the dismissal of my professional identity, the years of invisible service I had provided while hiding my success. "I see," she said when I finished. "And what exactly are you hoping to change?" "First, I want to review my will and trusts. Thomas is currently the primary beneficiary, with provisions for Oliver. I'd like to explore alternatives, such as charitable, foundations, educational trusts with specific conditions. Basically, I want to ensure that whatever Thomas and Oliver receive comes with strings attached, strings that reflect actual values and not just entitlement." "That can certainly be arranged," Marian said. "And the living situation?" I glanced around at the modest home I'd maintained for appearance's sake. "I want to stop hiding. I'm considering moving into one of my properties, the penthouse in Riverside Towers." Marian chuckled. "It's about time. That view is wasted on tenants. What about your current house?" "I'll keep it for now, but I'm stepping back from Thomas's life for a while. I need space to think." After arranging a meeting with Marian for later that week, I finally responded to Thomas's text with a simple, "Can't make Sunday dinner. Need to prepare for my conference. Will let you know when I'm free." His reply came quickly. "Everything okay? Not like you to miss family dinner." The concern seemed genuine, but I couldn't help wondering if it was more about the disruption to their routine than actual worry for my well-being. Who would clear the table and wash the pots if I wasn't there? "Everything's fine," I texted back. "Just busy." Over the next week, I methodically began my withdrawal. I canceled the standing grocery order I maintained for Thomas's family, which had been automatically delivering basics to their home for years without their knowledge. I stopped the monthly gardening service I secretly paid for that kept their yard immaculate, a service Thomas believed was included in their homeowners association fees. I called Oliver's private math tutor, whom I had hired and paid when Thomas mentioned his struggles with pre-algebra and explained that future arrangements would need to be made directly with his parents. I also contacted the summer coding camp where I had secured Oliver a spot and transferred the financial responsibility to Thomas. Each call felt like cutting a thread that had bound me to a role I had outgrown, or perhaps one I should never have accepted in the first place. Thomas called 3 days after I missed Sunday dinner. "Mom, is something wrong? Vanessa said she tried to drop off some dry cleaning for you to pick up, but you weren't home." I closed my eyes, absorbing the casual entitlement in his words. My son had assumed I would continue running errands for them despite missing dinner due to work obligations. "I've been staying at a hotel near the conference center," I lied smoothly. "The pre-conference meeting started earlier than expected." "A hotel? That seems unnecessary. Isn't the convention center only 40 minutes from your house? It makes networking easier," I said, offering no further explanation. "I'll be tied up with this for the next couple of weeks." Weeks? His voice rose in disbelief. But what about Oliver's science fair? You always help with his projects. I'm sure between you and Vanessa, you can handle a 6th-grade science project, I said, keeping my tone light but firm. You're both college-educated professionals. The silence that followed spoke volumes. Thomas had never considered that I might prioritize my own commitments over his family's needs. Well, he finally said, I guess we'll figure it out. Let me know when you're back in town. After hanging up, I stood at the window of my hotel suite, not near any conference center, but in the downtown high-rise where I owned 3 floors. For the first time in decades, I wasn't planning my day around someone else's schedule or needs. The freedom felt both exhilarating and terrifying. That afternoon, I met with Marion and my financial advisor, Richard Park, to begin the process of restructuring my assets. As we reviewed spreadsheets and property portfolios, Richard looked up at me with curiosity. Elena, if you don't mind my asking, why now? You've maintained this separation between your wealth and your family for decades. What changed? I considered the question carefully before answering. I used to think I was protecting Thomas from the potential pitfalls of inherited wealth. I wanted him to develop his own work ethic, his own identity separate from money. I paused, gathering my thoughts. But I've realized I wasn't protecting him. I was enabling him to devalue not just my contributions, but me as a person. The secrecy that I thought was principled has just become harmful to both of us. Marion nodded slowly. So what's the plan now? Full disclosure? Not immediately, I said. First, I need to reclaim myself. Then we'll see what kind of relationship is possible when I'm no longer just the convenient help. As I drove back to the hotel that evening, my phone lit up with a text from Vanessa. Oliver really disappointed you missed his basketball game today. He was counting on you being there. I hadn't even known there was a game. No one had told me. Yet somehow I was still expected to show up, to fulfill obligations I hadn't agreed to anticipate needs that weren't communicated. It was the last push I needed. That night, I began packing my personal items to move into my penthouse apartment. The withdrawal was complete. Now it was time to rebuild, on my terms. The penthouse at Riverside Towers felt simultaneously foreign and familiar as I stepped through the door with my first load of personal belongings. I had decorated this space years ago with the help of an interior designer friend, creating the home I truly wanted but never allowed myself to live in. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city skyline and the winding river that gave the building its name. Modern art, real pieces by established artists, not the reproductions that hung, in my modest house, adorned walls of soft gray. The furniture was elegant yet comfortable, nothing like the practical, durable pieces I'd surrounded myself with for decades. Ms. Vasquez, welcome home, said Marcus, the building manager who had overseen the property since I purchased it 5 years earlier. We've stocked the refrigerator as requested and updated the security protocols. Your private elevator keycard is on the counter. Thank you, Marcus. I set down my suitcase and moved to the windows, watching the afternoon light play across the water below. Has anyone called for me or asked about the unit? No, ma'am. As far as the staff knows, you're still just the owner's representative. He hesitated. Will that be changing now? I considered the question. Not immediately. Let's maintain that fiction for a little while longer. After Marcus left, I wandered through the space, my space, touching surfaces, opening cabinets, familiarizing myself with this life I had denied myself. The master bathroom featured a soaking tub positioned to view the sunrise. The kitchen boasted professional-grade appliances I had never used. The second bedroom had been converted into a home office that mirrored my professional workspace, but with higher-end furnishings. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine peace settle over me, not the manufactured calm of someone accommodating others, but the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where I belonged. Over the next 2 weeks, I established new routines. Mornings began with coffee on the balcony, watching the city wake up. I worked from my home office, reconnecting with clients I had somewhat neglected and exploring new investment opportunities. Evenings were spent at cultural events I had always wanted to attend, but had skipped to be available for Thomas's family. Symphony performances, gallery openings, lectures at the university. I made a point of turning off my phone during these outings, and each time I returned home to find increasingly urgent messages from Thomas. Mom, Oliver's science project is due Friday. When are you coming back to help? The lawn service didn't show up this week. Do you know what happened? Mom, we need to talk about the summer tutoring program for Oliver. They said the payment arrangement has changed. I responded to each message with brief, pleasant replies that offered no solutions. Still tied up with work. I'm sure Oliver will do great on his project. Or, I haven't heard anything about the lawn service. Have you checked with your HOA? Thomas's frustration grew palpable even through text. This isn't like you, Mom. We're worried. Maybe I should come check on you. The threat of a visit prompted my first substantial response. I'm fine, Thomas. Just busy with my own life. I've realized I've been too available in ways that haven't been healthy for any of us. We'll talk when I'm ready. His reply was immediate. What does that mean? What's going on with you? I didn't respond. Instead, I called Oliver directly, something I rarely did since communication was usually filtered through his parents. Grandma? His voice sounded smaller over the phone, less guarded than in person. Hi, sweetheart. I hear you have a science project. What's it about? His enthusiasm surprised me. It's about renewable energy. I'm building a mini solar panel that can charge a phone. Dad said you'd help, but I can't be there in person. But I'd love to hear your ideas. Maybe we could video chat about it? The conversation that followed was the most genuine interaction I'd had with my grandson in years. Without his parents as intermediaries, without the backdrop of their home, where I was relegated to helper status, Oliver and I simply talked. He had ideas. He was passionate. He asked questions I could answer based on my knowledge of energy companies I had invested in. After we hung up, I sat in the fading evening light feeling both lighter and heavier. The connection with Oliver had been real, but it highlighted how much had been lost in the dynamic his parents had created. Thomas called the next day, his tone unusually subdued. Oliver said you helped him with his project over video. He's really excited about it. He's a bright boy, I said simply. Mom, he sighed. What's really going on? You've never been unavailable like this before. Are you sick? Is that what this is about? The concern in his voice seemed genuine, which made it all the more painful. Thomas couldn't conceive of any reason for my absence except illness. The idea that I might have my own life, my own priorities, was unimaginable to him. I'm not sick. Thomas, I'm reassessing some things. I kept my voice gentle but firm. I've realized I've been so focused on supporting you and your family that I've neglected my own needs and identity. I'm taking some time for myself. But, he started, then stopped. After a moment, he continued with forced brightness. Well, that's good, I guess. Everyone needs a break sometimes. When do you think you'll be done with this reassessment? I almost laughed at his transparent attempt to establish an end date for my inconvenient independence. I'm not sure, I said honestly. But I'd like to invite you, Vanessa, and Oliver to dinner next month. There are some things I want to share with you all. Dinner at your place? The relief in his voice was palpable. He thought I was returning. To normal. No, I said. At Riverside Towers. The restaurant on the top floor. April 15th at 7. It's important, Thomas. Tax day dinner? He joked weakly. Sure, we'll be there. But Mom, you don't have to take us somewhere fancy. We're happy. With your home cooking. Happy with my home cooking. Happy with my free childcare. Happy with my invisible financial support. This is important, I repeated. Please make sure you're all there. After hanging up, I contacted Marion to ensure everything would be in place. By the 15th, the documents, the accounts, the presentation she had prepared at my request, everything needed to be perfect for what I had planned, not as revenge, but as reclamation. For the next few weeks, I maintained my distance while finalizing the details of my new life. I visited cultural landmarks I had always wanted to see. I had lunch with old colleagues who were surprised and delighted by my reemergence in social circles. I even went on a dinner date with a retired professor I met at a lecture series. Nothing serious, but a pleasant reminder that I could be valued for my mind, my experiences, my company. All the while, I received regular updates from Thomas, each one more transparently manipulative than the last. Oliver keeps asking when you're coming back. Oliver and I were now video chatting regularly without his parents' knowledge. The house just doesn't feel the same without your Sunday visits. Yet they had never once visited me in my home. Vanessa tried making your apple pie recipe, but it wasn't the same. The recipe she had previously criticized as too basic. I responded to each message with gentle deflection. The false peace they sought, a return to the status quo where I existed solely to serve their needs, was not forthcoming. Instead, I was cultivating a genuine peace within myself, one built on self-respect and authenticity. As April 15th approached, I felt neither anxiety nor vindictiveness, just clarity. It was time for the truth. 3 days before our scheduled dinner at Riverside Towers, Thomas called. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my home office when his name flashed across my phone screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something in me, perhaps the mother who had always answered his calls for 35 years, compelled me to pick up. "Hello, Thomas," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Mom, thank God, you answered." His voice had that particular urgency I recognized from childhood emergencies and adult crises alike. "We have a situation." I waited, saying nothing, giving him space to continue without my immediate offer of assistance. The silence stretched uncomfortably until he cleared his throat. "It's about the house. We just got a notice from the bank. There's some kind of issue with our mortgage payments. They're saying we're 3 months behind." My grip tightened on the phone. The mortgage I had helped them secure, with the substantial down payment I had provided, was not particularly burdensome. For their combined incomes, 3 months behind suggested serious financial mismanagement. "That sounds concerning," I said carefully. "Have you spoken with your bank?" "Of course I have." The frustration in his voice was palpable. "They're threatening to start foreclosure proceedings if we don't bring the account current immediately. We need to come up with $12,800 by the end of the week." Again, I waited, not immediately offering a solution as I would have in the past. "Mom," he finally said, his voice dropping to that cajoling tone he had used since childhood when he wanted something. "I hate to ask, but is there any way you could help us out? Just a loan until we get back on our feet. The firm is going through some restructuring and Vanessa's hours got cut at the hospital." I closed my eyes, absorbing the request. For years, Thomas had assumed I lived modestly because I had limited means, not by choice. Yet here he was, asking for a sum that he believed might represent my entire emergency fund. "That's a significant amount of money, Thomas," I said quietly. I know," he rushed to assure me. "We'd pay you back as soon as things stabilize. Maybe you could take out a small home equity loan. Your house is paid off, right? The bank would definitely approve it with your credit." The casual suggestion that I should mortgage my home to fix his financial irresponsibility struck me like a physical blow. In Thomas's worldview, my financial security was a reasonable sacrifice for his comfort. "What about Oliver's college fund?" I asked, knowing I had established a 529 plan for my grandson years ago, seeding it with $50,000 that Thomas believed had come from my retirement account. "That's for his education, Mom. We can't touch that." Thomas's voice held a note of moral superiority, as if he were protecting his son's future from my irresponsible suggestion. "I see," I said. "And what would happen if I couldn't help?" The question clearly caught him off guard. "What do you mean, if? Mom, this is serious. We could lose our home. Your grandson could be forced to change schools." The emotional manipulation was so transparent it almost felt clumsy. Thomas had never imagined a scenario where I would refuse his request. His sense of entitlement to my resources was absolute. "I understand it's serious," I replied, maintaining my composure. "I'm just trying to understand all the options." "There are no other options," he insisted, voice rising again. "We've already maxed out our credit cards keeping up appearances. Do you know how it would look if we had to downsize? Oliver would be devastated. His friends, his school, everything would change." I thought of Oliver, who video chatted with me about renewable energy and asked thoughtful questions about the world. The boy who was interested in sustainability and engineering. Would he really be devastated by a change in material circumstances? Or was that Thomas projecting his own values? "I need some time to think about this," I said finally. "We don't have time, Mom. The deadline is Friday." "I'm aware of the timeline. We have dinner scheduled for Thursday evening. We can discuss it then." "Thursday?" He sounded genuinely confused for a moment before remembering. "The dinner at Riverside Towers? Mom, we can't be thinking about fancy dinners at a time like this. We need to deal with this crisis now." "Thursday," I repeated firmly. 7 o'clock. I'll have an answer for you then." After we hung up, I sat motionless, staring out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the early evening. Thomas's request, or demand, more accurately, confirmed everything I had been reevaluating about our relationship. I was not seen as a person with my own needs and life. I was a resource to be tapped, a safety net to be deployed, with no consideration for what it might cost me. I picked up the phone again and called Marion. "My son just asked me for money to cover his delinquent mortgage," I explained after briefing her on the conversation. "He suggested I take out a home equity loan to give him nearly $13,000. Marion's derisive snort was audible even through the phone. "The same mortgage you helped secure with a $250,000 down payment?" "The very same." "And will you be advancing him the funds before your planned revelation?" I considered the question carefully. "No. If I step in now, nothing changes. This needs to be part of the larger conversation about responsibility, respect, and our relationship moving forward." "A wise decision," Marion said. "I've finalized all the documents for Thursday. The trust structures are in place. The presentation is prepared. And I've arranged for a private dining room at Riverside as you requested." I thanked her and hung up, then moved to the balcony with a glass of wine. Below me, the city continued its rhythmic pulse of traffic and pedestrians, everyone, moving with purpose to destinations unknown. For decades, my purpose had been singular: support Thomas, enable his success, be available for his needs. Now, my purpose was evolving into something more complex, reclaiming my own identity while redefining our relationship on healthier terms. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Just checking if you've had time to think about the house situation. We really need an answer ASAP." I did not respond. Some conversations were too important for text messages. Some revelations needed to be delivered in person, where I could see his eyes when he finally understood who I truly was, and who I would no longer allow myself to be. Instead, I texted Oliver, "Looking forward to seeing you at dinner on Thursday. I have something special to share with all of you." His response came quickly. "Can't wait, Grandma. Dad seems super stressed about something. Is everything okay?" I smiled at his perceptiveness. "Everything will be fine. Just some adult matters to sort out. How did your science project turn out?" Oliver launched into a detailed explanation of his solar panel success. I felt a renewed conviction about my plan. This wasn't just about standing up for myself. It was about modeling for my grandson what healthy boundaries and self-respect looked like. The lesson was one I wished I had taught his father long ago. The day before our scheduled dinner at Riverside. Towers. I woke early and stood at my penthouse windows, watching the sun rise over the city skyline. Orange and gold light spilled across glass towers, transforming the urban landscape into something almost ethereal. For 35 years, I had been too busy caring for others to appreciate such moments, too focused on Thomas's needs, too caught up in maintaining my facade of modest means. My phone had been unusually quiet since my conversation with Thomas about the mortgage. No more urgent texts, no calls asking if I'd had time to think about it. The silence felt calculated, as if he'd decided to give me space to come around to the inevitable, my capitulation to his financial emergency. What Thomas didn't realize was that this silence had given me something precious, uninterrupted clarity about the path forward. I moved to my home office and opened my laptop, reviewing once more the presentation Marian had prepared. The first slide displayed a simple number, $13,427,892, my current net worth, excluding physical assets like the penthouse and my collection of modern art. The subsequent slides broke down my holdings: investment properties, stock portfolios, business interests, and cash reserves. The final slides outlined my new estate plan, one that balanced genuine care for my family with accountability. No longer would Thomas receive an unrestricted inheritance. Instead, funds would be disbursed through carefully structured trusts with clear conditions reflecting values I should have insisted upon years ago: education, community service, demonstrated fiscal responsibility. As I closed the laptop, my phone chimed with a text from Oliver. "Grandma, is it okay if I bring my solar panel to show you tomorrow?" I smiled, warmth spreading through my chest. "Of course, sweetheart. I'd love to see it." At least one relationship in this family remained uncomplicated by entitlement and expectation. Oliver saw me as a person, not merely a resource. That gave me hope that once the initial shock wore off, Thomas might eventually see me the same way. I spent the afternoon at my regular hair salon, not the budget chain where I'd gone for years to maintain my frugal image, but the upscale downtown establishment, where I was known simply as Ms. Vasquez from the penthouse. As my stylist worked, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me appeared confident, elegant, self-possessed. The carefully cultivated image of the modest, slightly dowdy grandmother was gone. "You seem different today," my stylist remarked as she finished. "More present." I met her eyes in the mirror. "I'm reclaiming something I gave away a long time ago." She nodded as if she understood perfectly. "Well, it looks good on you." That evening, Marian stopped by the penthouse for a final review of our plans for the dinner. "The private dining room is confirmed," she said, checking items off her list. "I'll arrive 15 minutes before your family to ensure everything is in place. The documents will be in the blue portfolio on the sideboard, easily accessible but not immediately visible." "Perfect," I said, pouring us each a glass of wine. "And the transfer to cover Thomas's mortgage?" "Ready to execute at your command," Marian confirmed. "But remember, Elena, this is your decision. You're not obligated to solve his financial problems, especially if it reinforces unhealthy patterns." I sipped my wine, considering her words. I keep asking myself what I would do if this were a stranger asking for help, or even just an acquaintance. And I would want to know why they were in this situation. I would want assurances that the same problem wouldn't recur. I would expect transparency and accountability. I set down my glass. Why have I required less from my own son? Marian gave me a knowing look. Because mothers are socialized to give endlessly without expectation of return. Because you've confused enabling with loving. Because somewhere along, the way you started believing that your value to Thomas was measured by what you could provide, not who you are. Her words cut through the last vestiges of doubt I had been harboring. The clarity I had been approaching crystallized into absolute certainty. "When did you get so wise about my psychological blind spots?" I asked, attempting to lighten the moment. Marian laughed. "I've watched you build an empire while simultaneously diminishing yourself in your son's eyes." The contradiction was hard to miss. After she left, I stood on the balcony, watching the city lights, feeling a curious mix of anticipation and calm. Tomorrow would change everything, not because I wanted to hurt or shock Thomas, but because truth was the only foundation upon which we could possibly build a healthier relationship. My phone rang. Thomas again. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but decided against it. This would be our last conversation before the revelation that would forever alter how he saw me. "Hello, Thomas." "Mom." His voice was tight with poorly suppressed anxiety. "I just wanted to confirm we're still on for dinner tomorrow night." "Yes, 7 o'clock at Riverside Towers. The restaurant has a record of the reservation under my name." "Great." "That's great." He paused, and I could almost hear him weighing his next words. "Have you had a chance to think about what we discussed? About the house situation?" "I have," I said simply. "We'll discuss it tomorrow at dinner." "But Mom..." "Tomorrow, Thomas." My tone was gentle but left no room for negotiation. "This isn't a conversation for the phone." He sighed heavily. "Fine. Tomorrow. It's just, this is really important, Mom. We're talking about Oliver's stability, his home." The emotional manipulation was so familiar it almost felt scripted. Thomas had always known exactly which buttons to push. My love for my grandson, my desire to protect him from disruption or harm. For years it had worked flawlessly. Now, with my new clarity, I recognized it for what it was. "I understand the stakes," I replied calmly. "That's why we need to have a proper conversation, face to face." After hanging up, I spent the remainder of the evening reviewing old photo albums, pictures of Thomas as a child, a teenager, a college graduate. I studied his face in each image, tracing the evolution from the curious, open-hearted boy I had raised to the entitled man he had become. Somewhere along that journey, I had failed him by confusing self-sacrifice with good parenting. The realization wasn't bitter, it was illuminating. We had both contributed to the dysfunctional dynamic between us. My revelation tomorrow wasn't just about asserting my own worth. It was about creating an opportunity for Thomas to reclaim his integrity as well. I slept deeply that night, without the anxiety that had plagued me for years whenever I contemplated changing my relationship with my son. The clarity I had achieved acted as a balm, soothing old wounds and uncertainties. In the morning, I stood before my closet, considering my options for the evening ahead. I bypassed the practical, modest outfits I had worn for family gatherings in the past. Instead, I selected a tailored midnight blue dress from a designer boutique, elegant but not ostentatious. I would not be playing the role of the humble, self-effacing mother tonight. I would be presenting myself authentically, successful, confident, and worthy of respect. As I fastened a simple strand of pearls around my neck, a gift to myself when I made my first million, I felt a profound sense of alignment. For the first time in decades, my inner reality and outer presentation would match. No more diminishing my achievements. No more hiding my success to prevent my son from feeling inadequate. The truth was both simpler and more complex than the fiction I had maintained. I was a woman who had built something significant through intelligence and perseverance. I was a mother who had made mistakes out of love. And I was, finally, ready to be seen for who I truly was, not just as Thomas's convenient help, but as Elena Vasquez in all her complicated glory. The day of the dinner arrived with a crystalline clarity to the spring air. I spent the morning reviewing the final preparations with Marian, confirming every detail of the evening ahead. "The private dining room has the oval table as requested," she noted, consulting her tablet. I've arranged for the financial documents to be placed in the leather portfolio. Discreet but accessible when needed. The chef has confirmed the menu selections and the sommelier has pulled the wines you specified. I nodded, appreciating Marion's attention to detail. She had been more than my attorney over the years. She had become a trusted confidant who understood exactly what this evening represented. And the transfer for Thomas's mortgage? I asked. Ready but not executed, she confirmed. As we discussed, that decision remains entirely yours to make after the conversation. As Marion gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door. Elena, I've watched you build an empire with unwavering strategic vision. Apply that same clarity to tonight. Her words stayed with me as I dressed for the evening. The midnight blue dress fit perfectly, skimming my figure without being ostentatious. I added simple pearl earrings and a thin gold bracelet, elegant but understated. My reflection showed a woman of substance and achievement, not the self-effacing mother who had hidden behind modest clothes and downplayed accomplishments for decades. At precisely 6 o'clock, I called my driver, another luxury I had never allowed myself to use, for family gatherings. The Riverside Towers restaurant, please, Michael, I said as I settled into the back seat of the Lincoln Continental. Of course, Ms. Vasquez. He pulled smoothly into traffic, navigating toward the gleaming high-rise that housed both my penthouse and the exclusive restaurant on its top floor. During the drive, I reviewed the mental script I had prepared. This wasn't about shocking Thomas or punishing him for his entitled behavior. It was about honesty, about reclaiming my identity, and about establishing a healthier foundation for our relationship moving forward. Michael pulled up to the private entrance of Riverside Towers at 6:30, exactly as planned. The doorman greeted, me by name. Good evening, Ms. Vasquez. Your guests haven't arrived yet, but Ms. Hamilton is already upstairs in the private dining room. Thank you, George. I stepped into the private elevator that would take me directly to the restaurant floor. Maitre d' greeted me as I emerged. Ms. Vasquez, everything is prepared as you requested. Would you like to inspect the room before your family arrives? I followed him through the main dining area, already buzzing with early dinner patrons enjoying sunset views of the city, to a discreet door at the back. The private dining room beyond was perfect, intimate but not cramped, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the river and downtown skyline. A round table was set for 4, with fine china and crystal catching the early evening light. Marion rose from where she had been reviewing documents at a side table. Everything is in place, she said, gesturing to the leather portfolio. I'll be in the main dining room if you need me. She squeezed my hand briefly before leaving, a small gesture of support that meant more than words could express. I moved to the windows, watching the city sprawl beneath me. This view, this entire building, represented the empire I had built while pretending to live a modest life. Tonight, Thomas would finally understand who his mother truly was. At 6:55, my phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Pulling up now. Where do we go? The main entrance. Tell the doorman you're my guests. He'll direct you. I positioned myself, strategically, standing by the windows with my back to the door, giving myself a moment to compose my face before turning to greet them. At precisely 7 o'clock, I heard the door open. Mom! Thomas's voice contained a note of confusion I hadn't anticipated. I turned slowly, watching as his eyes widened, taking in my appearance, so different from the practical, slightly dowdy mother he was accustomed to seeing. Behind him, Vanessa stood with her mouth slightly open, staring at the luxurious private dining room with undisguised surprise. Oliver pushed past them both, his face lighting up with a genuine smile. Grandma! This place is amazing! He rushed forward, clutching a cardboard presentation board, his solar panel project. I brought it to show you, just like I promised. I embraced him warmly. I can't wait to see it, sweetheart. Looking over his head, I met Thomas's still bewildered gaze. Welcome. Please, come in. Thomas stepped further into the room, his eyes darting from the expensive settings to the panoramic view. Mom, what is all this? How can you possibly afford— Let's sit down, I interrupted smoothly. We have a lot to discuss. Vanessa moved to what appeared to be the head of the table, but I directed her to another seat. Actually, I'll sit there tonight, if you don't mind. Her surprise turned to a barely concealed frown, but she complied, taking the seat beside Thomas instead. Oliver settled in beside me, eagerly propping his science project against an empty chair. A server appeared almost immediately with water and warm bread. Ms. Vasquez, would you like to begin with the champagne you selected? Yes, please. I nodded my appreciation, not missing the sharp look Thomas and Vanessa exchanged at the server's familiar use of my name. As the champagne was poured, sparkling cider for Oliver, Thomas leaned forward, his face tight with barely contained anxiety. Mom? Before we get into whatever this is, he gestured vaguely at the surroundings, we really need to discuss the house situation. The deadline is tomorrow. Yes, I said calmly, taking a sip of champagne. We'll discuss that. But first, I think there are some things you need to understand about me. I placed my glass down deliberately. About who I really am and what that means for our relationship moving forward. What are you talking about? Vanessa asked, her voice pitched higher than normal. I looked directly at my son. Thomas, for 35 years I've allowed you to believe certain things about me that aren't true. About my financial situation, my professional life, the choices I've made. He frowned, confusion evident in the furrow of his brow. What do you mean? Mom, if you're in some kind of trouble— I'm not in trouble, Thomas. Quite the opposite. I reached for the leather portfolio that Marion had placed on the sideboard and set it on the table between us. I've been keeping something from you, something I initially hid to protect you, but that over time became unhealthy for both of us. I opened the portfolio and removed the first document, a statement of net worth prepared by my financial team. Without speaking, I slid it across the table to Thomas. He glanced down, his expression shifting from confusion to shock as he registered the number at the top of the page. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Mom, there must be some mistake. This says 13th 427th 892. I finished for him. And that's a conservative valuation that doesn't include physical assets. Vanessa reached for the paper, practically snatching it from Thomas's suddenly limp fingers. Her eyes widened as she scanned the figures. This can't be right. It's correct, I said simply. I am, by most definitions, wealthy. I own this building, including the penthouse where I've been living for the past month. I have substantial investment portfolios, commercial real estate holdings, and stakes in several businesses. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by Oliver's innocent question. Grandma, does this mean you're rich? I smiled at him gently. Yes, sweetheart, it does. Thomas's face went through a remarkable series of transformations. Shock gave way to disbelief, then confusion, and finally something that looked almost like anger. He pushed the financial statement away as if it might burn him. How is this possible? He demanded. You've lived in that small house for decades. You drive a 10-year-old Toyota. He hesitated, grasping for evidence of my supposed modest means. You use coupons at the grocery store. I took another sip of champagne, giving myself a moment to compose my response. All choices, Thomas. Deliberate decisions about how to appear versus how to invest. I started building my portfolio while you were still in elementary school. By the time you were in college, I was managing significant assets. But why would you hide this? Vanessa interjected. Her tone was accusatory, but her eyes kept darting to the financial statement, recalculating every interaction we'd ever had. Why pretend to be— She trailed off, apparently unable to find a tactful way to finish. Why pretend to be of modest means? I supplied. Initially, it was about values. I didn't want you growing up entitled, Thomas. I wanted you to develop your own work ethic, to build your own success without relying on my wealth. Thomas's jaw tightened. So this was some kind of test? A decades-long experiment to see if I measured up to your standards? No, I said firmly. It was a parenting choice, and perhaps not always the right one. But over time, it became something else. I met his gaze directly. It became easier to maintain the fiction than to confront the way our relationship had evolved. The way you and Vanessa came to see me not as a person with my own life and needs, but as— how did you put it? The free help. Thomas visibly flinched, his eyes widening as he recognized his own words. Even Vanessa had the grace to look uncomfortable, her gaze dropping to her untouched champagne. I heard you that Sunday, I continued quietly. Through the kitchen window. I heard what you said about me, that I was just the free help, that there was no need to hire a maid when I would do everything for nothing. Mom, Thomas began, his face flushing red. Please let me finish, I said, holding up a hand. That moment was clarifying for me. It made me realize that I had enabled a dynamic where my value to you was measured solely by what I could provide: childcare, housekeeping, financial support, rather than who I am. Vanessa's discomfort seemed to transform into defensiveness. That's not fair. We've always appreciated your help. Have you? I asked softly. When was the last time either of you asked about my life, my interests, my work? When was the last time you visited me at my home, rather than expecting me to come to yours? When was the last time you considered my needs before making demands on my time? The silence that followed was deafening. Even Oliver seemed to sense the tension, his earlier excitement dimming as he looked uncertainly between the adults at the table. Thomas cleared his throat. If this is about money, it's not about money, I interrupted. It's about respect, recognition, seeing me as a complete person with my own identity beyond my role as your mother or Oliver's grandmother. I slid another document across the table, a detailed accounting of all the financial support I had provided over the years, from the down payment on their house to the hidden subsidies for lawn care, groceries, and Oliver's educational enrichment. Programs! Thomas stared at the document, his expression darkening. So you've been keeping score? Tallying up everything you've done for us like we're some kind of investment? No, Thomas, I've been invisible. This document simply makes visible what has been happening in the background of your life for years. Support you never acknowledged because you never knew it existed. Vanessa's fingers drummed nervously on the table. I don't understand why you're doing this now. What do you want from us? The question was so revealing, her immediate assumption, that this revelation came with expectations, with conditions, with a price tag. As if even this moment of honesty must be transactional. I want to be seen, I said simply. I want a relationship with my son and his family that's based on mutual respect, not convenience. I want to stop pretending to be less than I am to make others more comfortable. I turned to Oliver, who had been watching this exchange with the careful attention of a child who has learned to read emotional currents. And I want my grandson to grow up understanding that people have value beyond what they can provide for others. Oliver nodded seriously, though I doubted he fully grasped the subtext. He reached for his science project. Is that why you helped me with this even when you were busy? Because you care about me, not just what you can do for me? His innocent question cut through the tension, striking at the heart of the matter with childlike precision. I smiled at him, feeling a rush of affection. Exactly, sweetheart. Relationships should be built on care, not utility. Thomas pushed back from the table slightly, his posture defensive. And our mortgage? Was that just a convenient opportunity for you to spring this revelation on us? Some kind of power play? The undercurrent of his question was clear. Despite everything I had just explained, his first thought was still how my disclosure would affect his immediate financial need. No, Thomas. Your financial emergency didn't prompt this revelation. It just accelerated the timeline. I've been planning this conversation since the day I heard you call me the free help. I reached for the portfolio again and removed a final document, a cashier's check made out to his mortgage company for the full $12,800 he needed to bring his account current. This is not a loan, I said, placing it before him. It's a gift, with no strings attached. I'm not withholding help to punish you. But going forward, any financial support will be transparent, acknowledged, and approached with appropriate gratitude, not entitlement. Thomas stared at the check, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might tear it up in a gesture of wounded pride. Instead, he folded it carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket without a word of thanks. The server appeared discreetly at that moment to inform us that our first course was ready to be served. The timing provided a welcome break in the emotional intensity, giving everyone a moment to process what had transpired. As the elegant plates of seared scallops were placed before us, I noticed Vanessa studying me with new eyes, taking in my tailored dress, my confidence, the way that staff deferred to me with genuine respect. She was recalibrating, reassessing my place in the hierarchy she had constructed in her mind. Thomas, meanwhile, seemed to be grappling with multiple realizations at once. Not just the fact of my wealth, but the implications of how he had treated someone who had silently supported him in ways he had never imagined. Oliver, bless his heart, simply picked up his fork and began eating with the uncomplicated hunger of a growing boy, seemingly unbothered by the adult tensions swirling around him. The first confrontation had unfolded largely as I had anticipated. Initial shock, defensiveness, attempts to reframe the narrative to preserve ego. Now we would see if the foundation I had just cracked could be rebuilt into something stronger, something more authentic, or if some relationships, once their true nature is exposed, cannot survive the light of honesty. As we ate our first course, a weighted silence hung over the table. Thomas kept his eyes fixed on his plate, mechanically consuming the scallops without seeming to taste them. Vanessa alternated between darting glances at me and scanning the luxurious room, as if trying to reconcile the elegant woman before her with the convenient childcare provider she had taken for granted. Oliver, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it, attempted to fill the silence. These scallops are way better than the ones Dad tried to make last week. They were super rubbery. Despite the heaviness of the moment, I couldn't help but smile at his honest assessment. The chef here is quite talented, I agreed, grateful for his innocent attempt to normalize the situation. As the server cleared our first course plates, I decided to move forward with the next phase of my plan. I had revealed the truth of my financial situation. Now it was time to clarify what that meant for our relationship moving forward. I know this is a lot to process, I said, addressing Thomas and Vanessa directly. But there's more we need to discuss. Thomas's head snapped up, his expression guarded. More? What else could there possibly be? The terms of our relationship going forward, I said calmly. For too long, I've allowed myself to be used as a convenience rather than respected as a person with my own life and needs. That ends today. I removed another document from the leather portfolio, a simple, clear outline I had prepared with Marion's help. Not a legal contract, but rather a statement of expectations and boundaries. What is this supposed to be? Vanessa asked, not reaching. For the paper? Clarity, I replied. Something our relationship has lacked. Thomas reluctantly took the document, his eyes scanning the page. I could pinpoint the exact moment he reached the section about childcare limitations. His brow furrowed, and his mouth tightened at the corners. Available for prearranged childcare not to exceed 2 days per week, he read aloud, his voice tinged with disbelief. 24 hours notice required except in genuine emergencies. Mom, you can't be serious. I'm entirely serious, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. I love Oliver, and I want to be part of his life. But I will no longer be the default unacknowledged childcare provider who rearranges her life whenever it's convenient for you. Vanessa's face flushed. So you're putting conditions on seeing your own grandson now? No, I'm putting boundaries around how and when I'm available. I corrected her. There's a difference. Boundaries are healthy. They allow relationships to flourish with mutual respect. But what about our careers? Vanessa pressed. We rely on your flexibility. You've relied on my seeming lack of options, I countered. The assumption that I had nothing more important to do with my time than be at your disposal. That changes now. I gestured around the private dining room. I have a life beyond being your mother and Oliver's grandmother. I have business interests, investments to manage, philanthropic work I've put off for too long, friends I've neglected because I was always available for your family's needs. The main course arrived, perfectly cooked beef tenderloin for the adults, and the gourmet burger I had specifically requested for Oliver. The timing of the service provided another natural pause in the intense conversation, giving Thomas and Vanessa a moment to absorb what I was saying. As we began eating, Thomas set down his fork with deliberate control. So what happens if we don't agree to these terms? He practically spat the last word. This isn't a negotiation, Thomas. These are my boundaries, not a contract requiring your signature. I'm informing you of how I will conduct myself going forward. What you do with that information is up to you. Oliver looked up from his burger, a smear of ketchup at the corner of his mouth. Dad, is Grandma not going to watch me anymore? The innocent question seemed to land like a slap. Thomas's expression softened as he looked at his son. No, buddy, that's not. Grandma's just going to be on a schedule now, like soccer practice. I smiled at Oliver. I'll still have our special days together, sweetheart. We'll just plan them in advance, so I can also make time for my other responsibilities. Like running the building? He asked, gesturing around with a French fry. Is that why everyone here knows your name? Yes, exactly like that, I confirmed, impressed by his perception. I own this building, which means I have to make sure everything runs smoothly for all the people who live and work here. Vanessa made a small noise, something between a scoff and a sigh, but said nothing. Her eyes kept returning to the document of boundaries, her expression calculating. I could almost see her mind working, trying to determine how these new limitations would impact their lives, their schedules, their convenience, their expectations. There's one more thing we need to discuss, I said, turning back to Thomas. The financial support I've provided over the years. Thomas's jaw visibly tightened. If you're going to ask for the money back, I'm not, I interrupted. Every gift I've given was exactly that. A gift with no expectation of repayment. The down payment on your house, Oliver's education fund, the various subsidies I've provided, those were expressions of my love for you and your family. I paused to take a sip of water, choosing my next words carefully. However, going forward, any financial assistance will be transparent and acknowledged. No more hidden support that allows you to believe you're more financially independent than you actually are. Thomas flushed, his knuckles white around his fork. So this is about gratitude? You want us to… what? Bow and scrape because you've decided to reveal your secret fortune? No, Thomas. This is about honesty. About seeing me, really seeing me, as the person I am, not the convenient fiction you've constructed. I set down my glass deliberately, and it's about you taking genuine responsibility for your own financial choices instead of assuming I'll always be there to rescue you. Vanessa's voice was tight when she finally spoke. And Oliver? Does he factor into these new boundaries of yours? My heart softened as I looked at my grandson, happily demolishing his burger, blissfully unaware of the adult currents swirling around him. My relationship with Oliver is non-negotiable. I will always be his grandmother, always love him, always support his growth and education. That's why I've established a trust for him. This caught both their attentions immediately. A trust? Thomas repeated. Yes, for his education primarily, with additional funds that will become available to him in stages as he reaches adulthood. It's structured to encourage his independence and responsibility, not to create dependence. And who controls this trust? Vanessa asked sharply. I do, with Marion Hamilton as co-trustee. When I pass, Marion will become the sole trustee until Oliver reaches the specified milestones. I met her gaze steadily. The trust is irrevocable. Neither you nor Thomas will have access to those funds, or the ability to modify the terms. The implication was clear. I no longer trusted them to make financial decisions regarding Oliver's future. This was perhaps the most pointed aspect of my new boundaries, and I could see from their expressions that the message had landed as intended. So you're bribing him, Thomas said bitterly, making sure he stays loyal to you even if we don't play by your new rules. I'm securing his future, I corrected firmly. Something every grandparent has the right to do. The fact that you see it as a manipulation says more about your perspective than mine. As the server cleared our plates and prepared to bring dessert, I felt the weight of decades of unspoken truths finally lifting from my shoulders. The boundaries were set. The terms were clear. Now it remained to be seen whether Thomas and Vanessa could adjust to this new reality, whether our relationship could evolve into something healthier, more balanced, more authentic, or whether the truth, so long deferred, had come too late to save us from the patterns we had created together. Dessert arrived, a delicate chocolate soufflé for the adults and an elaborate ice cream sundae for Oliver that made his eyes widen with delight. The server poured coffee for Thomas and Vanessa and placed a hot chocolate with homemade marshmallows in front of my grandson. Thanks, Grandma, Oliver exclaimed, diving into his treat with enthusiasm undiminished by the tension surrounding him. Thomas stared at his soufflé without touching it. So this is it? You've made your declaration, set your terms, and we're just supposed to accept it all without discussion? I took a small bite of my dessert before answering. Discussion is welcome. Thomas, but the boundaries themselves are not negotiable. You realize this changes everything, Vanessa said, her voice low enough that Oliver, absorbed in his ice cream, wouldn't hear. Our entire schedule is built around your availability. We've turned down backup childcare options because you were always there. I understand that, I acknowledged. And I'm giving you time to make alternative arrangements. The boundaries go into effect 2 weeks from today. Thomas gave a sharp, humorless laugh. How generous of you. It is generous, I replied calmly. I could have simply stopped showing up, the way you two have often changed plans without consulting me. Instead, I'm providing clear communication and a transition period. This pointed reminder of their own behavior seemed to land effectively. Vanessa had the grace to look slightly abashed, though Thomas maintained his defensive posture. And after the 2 weeks? He pressed. What then? Then I expect my boundaries to be respected. If you call asking for last-minute childcare, I'll remind you of our agreement. If you drop by unannounced expecting me to be available, I won't be. If you ask for financial assistance, we'll discuss it transparently with clear terms. And if we need help outside your precious boundaries? The bitterness in Thomas's voice was palpable. Genuine emergencies are accounted for in the document, I said, gesturing toward the paper he had set aside. I will always be there in a true crisis, but your lack of planning does not constitute an emergency on my part. The phrase, one I had practiced with Marion, hung in the air between us. For decades, I had responded to every call, every request, every demand without question. The shift to thoughtful consideration of my own needs would require consistent enforcement, not just declarations. Oliver, having demolished half his Sunday, looked up suddenly. "Dad, is this why you were so worried about money? Because Grandma wasn't going to help anymore?" The innocent question landed like a thunderclap. Thomas's face flushed deeply, and Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. No, buddy. That's not exactly it," Thomas stammered. I reached over and gently squeezed Oliver's hand. "Your dad and mom had a problem with their mortgage. That's a payment for your house. I'm helping them with that. But going forward, we're going to be more clear about when and how I help." Oliver considered this with the straightforward logic of a child. "So you'll still help, but they have to ask nicely and not just expect it?" I couldn't help but smile at his perfect distillation of the situation. "That's exactly right, sweetheart. That seems fair," he said with a shrug, returning to his ice cream. "Mom always says I have to ask nicely for things and not just expect them." Thomas and Vanessa exchanged uncomfortable glances, caught in the mirror of their son's innocent observation. The irony of expecting behavior from Oliver that they themselves had not demonstrated toward me was impossible to ignore. As we finished dessert, I could see Thomas wrestling with his emotions: pride, embarrassment, perhaps even genuine regret. Vanessa, ever pragmatic, seemed to be calculating how to adapt to this new reality with minimal disruption to their lives. "I have something for Oliver before we leave," I said, reaching for a small wrapped package I had placed on the sideboard. "A small gift to celebrate your science project success." Oliver tore into the package eagerly, revealing a beginner's solar engineering kit far more sophisticated than his school project. "Wow, this is awesome! Can we build it together, Grandma?" "Of course," I said. "We can schedule our first session next week. Tuesday afternoon, perhaps." I looked pointedly at Thomas and Vanessa as I said this. My first demonstration of the new boundary system. Not whenever works for your parents, but a specific time proposal that respected my schedule, as well as theirs. Thomas nodded stiffly. "Tuesday should be fine. I'll check our calendar and confirm tomorrow." "Perfect," I replied. "Just let me know by Sunday evening so I can plan accordingly." As the dinner concluded and we prepared to leave, I signed the check without comment. Another small demonstration of the reality they had been unaware of for so long. The staff's deference to me, the ease with which I navigated this world of luxury they had never associated with their practical, modest mother, continued to visibly unsettle Thomas and Vanessa. In the lobby, Michael was waiting with the car to take me home. "Would you like me to arrange a car for your family as well, Ms. Vasquez?" he asked discreetly. Before I could answer, Thomas interjected, "We can manage our own transportation, thank you," his pride clearly still smarting. I embraced Oliver warmly. "I'll see you Tuesday, sweetheart. Bring your solar panel. I want to see it in action." As they walked toward the parking area, I heard Oliver ask, "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me Grandma was rich?" Thomas's reply was too quiet to hear, but his hunched shoulders told me everything I needed to know about his continued struggle to reconcile the mother he thought he knew with the woman I had revealed myself to be. The first test of my new boundaries had been set for Tuesday. Now we would see if words could translate into lasting change, and if a relationship built on convenience could evolve into one founded on mutual respect. The Tuesday following our revelatory dinner arrived with unexpected clarity, both in the crisp spring air and in my own sense of purpose. I had spent the intervening days settling more completely into my penthouse, arranging my office to better accommodate my renewed focus on business interests, and, most importantly, preparing for my first scheduled visit with Oliver under the new boundary system. At precisely noon, I received a text from Thomas. "Oliver is excited about today. We'll drop him off at 3 car and pick him up at 6 car as discussed." The formal tone was new, a stark contrast to his previous messages that had always assumed my availability without confirmation. I replied with equal clarity, "Perfect. I'll be ready for him at 3. We'll be working on the solar kit in my home office." At 2:45, my phone rang. Marion checking in as she had promised. "How are you feeling about this afternoon?" she asked without preamble. "Surprisingly calm," I admitted. "I've been preparing for boundary violations, but so far Thomas has been rigidly compliant with the new system." "Compliance isn't the same as acceptance," Marion cautioned. "Be prepared for testing, subtle or overt. First boundaries are always challenged, especially when they disrupt long-established patterns." I appreciated her pragmatism. "I'll be vigilant, but today is about Oliver, not Thomas or Vanessa. I want to make sure he doesn't feel caught in adult tensions." "A wise approach," Marion agreed. "By the way, the West Side Community Foundation called again about your interest in their board position. I told them you'd consider it next week. The foundation work was part of my reemergence plan, reclaiming not just my personal boundaries, but my place in the wider community, a place I had relinquished years ago to be perpetually available to Thomas's family. Tell them I'm definitely interested. Schedule an initial meeting, but make sure it doesn't conflict with my Tuesday and Thursday afternoons with Oliver." At precisely 3 hours, the concierge called to announce Thomas and Oliver had arrived. I instructed him to send them up, another first, as neither had ever visited my penthouse before. The look on Thomas's face when the private elevator opened directly into my foyer was worth photographing. Shock mingled with what might have been embarrassment as he took in the elegant space, the artwork, the panoramic views. Oliver, meanwhile, bounded forward with a child's unself-conscious enthusiasm. "Whoa! Grandma, you live here? This is like a superhero headquarters." I laughed, genuinely delighted by his response. "It's just home to me, sweetheart. But yes, the view is pretty spectacular." Thomas remained near the elevator, his posture stiff. 6 o'clock, he reminded unnecessarily. "Vanessa has that dinner with her hospital colleagues, so I'll be picking him up." "We'll be ready," I assured him. "Oliver brought his science project to show me?" My grandson held up his solar panel proudly. "And I brought my notebook to write down everything we learned from the new kit." Thomas nodded awkwardly, clearly uncertain of his role in this new arrangement where he dropped off his son at his mother's luxury penthouse for a scheduled visit. "Right. Well, have fun." As the elevator doors closed behind him, I turned my full attention to Oliver. "Let's set up in my office. I have everything ready for us." The afternoon passed in a blur of shared discovery. Oliver proved remarkably adept at following the instructions for the solar kit, asking insightful questions that revealed a genuine interest in renewable energy. I found myself explaining concepts from my investment work in clean energy startups, translating complex ideas into terms he could understand. "So you help people build big versions of what we're making?" he asked, connecting wires with careful precision. "In a way, yes. I invest money in companies that are developing new forms of energy that won't harm the planet." He looked up, his expression serious. "That's way more important than just being rich, Grandma." The simple wisdom in his statement caught me off guard. "You're absolutely right, Oliver. Having money is meaningless unless you do something worthwhile with it." At 5:30, as we were documenting our results in Oliver's notebook, my phone chimed with a text from Thomas. "Running about 30 min late. Traffic accident on the highway. Can you keep Oliver until 6:30? In the old system, this would have been a statement, not a question, an assumption that my time was infinitely flexible to accommodate their needs. The fact that he was now asking represented progress, however small. "That's fine," I texted back. "We're making good progress on the solar kit. Drive safely." Oliver and I used the extra time to clean up our workspace and then moved to the kitchen, where I had prepared his favorite cookies in anticipation of our session. As he munched happily, he asked the question I had been expecting since Sunday. "Grandma, are you mad at Dad and Mom?" I chose my words carefully. "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad. I just needed to make some changes in how we arrange our time together. Sometimes adults need to reset boundaries to have healthier relationships." Nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. Like when Dad says I need to knock before entering their bedroom instead of just barging in? Exactly like that, I agreed, impressed by his comprehension. Everyone needs their space respected, even people who love each other very much. When Thomas arrived at 6:35, apologizing again for the delay, Oliver proudly showed him the progress we had made on the solar kit. "We're going to finish it on Thursday," he announced. "Grandma says we can test it on the balcony where it gets the most direct sunlight." Thomas nodded, his eyes taking in the expensive kit, the comfortable workspace we had created, the easy rapport between his son and mother that seemed unchanged despite the dramatic shifts in our adult relationship. That sounds great, buddy." He turned to me, his expression still guarded but less hostile than it had been at dinner. "Thanks for being flexible with the pickup time." 30 minutes for traffic is a reasonable accommodation, I said simply. "That's not boundary crossing, Thomas. That's normal flexibility within a structured agreement." Something in my tone must have resonated, because he gave a short nod of what seemed like genuine understanding, before ushering Oliver toward the elevator. As they left, I felt a curious lightness. The first scheduled visit under the new system had proceeded without conflict, proving that boundaries didn't diminish connection, but rather created space for more authentic interaction. With Oliver, at least, the path forward seemed clear and promising. For Thomas and Vanessa, the journey would be longer, the adjustment more painful. But today had offered a glimpse of what might be possible if they could truly see me as I was. Not just a convenient resource, but a woman of substance with a life and purpose of her own. Over the following weeks, a new rhythm established itself between me and Thomas's family. Our Tuesday and Thursday afternoons became sacred time with Oliver, predictable, scheduled, and surprisingly fulfilling now that they were on my terms rather than by default obligation. We completed the solar kit and moved on to increasingly complex projects that engaged his curious mind and inventive spirit. More surprising was the subtle shift in Thomas and Vanessa's behavior. The rigid formality of those first few interactions gradually softened into something resembling respect. They no longer assumed my availability for last-minute errands or childcare. When they did need assistance outside our scheduled times, their requests came framed as genuine questions, not expectations. "Mom, we have an unexpected work dinner next Wednesday," Thomas might text. "Would you be available to watch Oliver from 6 chows to 9 chow? We can arrange an alternative if it conflicts with your schedule." This simple acknowledgement that I might have plans of my own represented more progress than any conversation could have achieved. The mortgage payment issue had been resolved with the check I provided, though neither Thomas nor Vanessa had directly acknowledged it beyond a terse thank you text. Their pride was still wounded, their adjustment to our new dynamic still evolving. But the most profound change was happening with Oliver. Free from the tension of unspoken resentments and unclear expectations, our relationship flourished. More importantly, he was witnessing firsthand the power of healthy boundaries modeled by adults in his life. "Grandma," he said one Thursday as we worked on calibrating a miniature wind turbine on my balcony, "I told Dad I can't just barge into his office when he's working anymore. I said we needed clear boundaries like you taught me." I smiled, imagining Thomas's reaction to having his son echo my terminology. "And what did your father say?" He got this funny look, then he laughed and said you were rubbing off on me. But he also said I was right, and now we have a special knock I can use when I really need him. These small lessons in mutual respect and clear communication were exactly what I had hoped would emerge from my reclamation of dignity, not just for my sake, but for Oliver's, for the kind of man I wanted him to become, one who valued others for who they were, not merely what they could provide. My life beyond family obligations was expanding as well. I accepted the position on the Westside Community Foundation Board, where my financial expertise proved valuable to their endowment management. I re-engaged with business associates who had wondered about my years of relative seclusion. I even began mentoring young women, entrepreneurs through a program at the local university. Each of these connections reinforced what I had known intellectually, but forgotten emotionally, that my value extended far beyond my role as a mother and grandmother, that I had skills, insights, and contributions that benefited a community, much wider than Thomas's immediate family. And in this expanding circle of genuine relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation, I found a fulfillment that decades of self-sacrifice had never provided. The woman who had once been invisible. The convenient help, the background support, the unacknowledged provider, was stepping fully into the light of her own making. Not with bitterness or resentment, but with the quiet confidence of someone who finally understood her own worth. And that, perhaps, was the most positive influence of all, not just for Thomas, Vanessa, and Oliver, but for myself as well. The peaceful rhythm that had developed between my family and me lasted nearly 2 months before the inevitable test came. I had been anticipating it, waiting for the moment when my boundaries would face a genuine challenge rather than the cautious compliance Thomas and Vanessa had demonstrated thus far. It arrived on a Wednesday evening while I was attending a fundraising gala for the Community Foundation. I had just finished delivering remarks about our new scholarship initiative when my phone vibrated repeatedly with incoming calls from Thomas. After the third attempt in 5 minutes, I discreetly stepped into the hallway to answer. "Mom, thank God." Thomas's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "We need you to come over right away. Vanessa's mother had a fall and we need to drive to Riverside immediately to check on her. We need you to stay with Oliver." In the background, I could hear the sound of hurried packing, drawers slamming, Vanessa's stressed voice giving instructions. "I'm at the foundation gala," I replied calmly. "The one I mentioned last week at our dinner. I'm one of the keynote speakers." "Mom, this is an emergency," Thomas insisted, his tone sharpening. "Vanessa is beside herself. Her mother might have broken her hip. We need to leave in the next 20 minutes. Before my boundaries, there would have been no question. I would have immediately left whatever I was doing, regardless of importance, and rushed to their aid. But now I took a measured breath before responding. "I understand this is serious. Thomas, is there anyone else you can call? A neighbor? One of Oliver's friends' parents?" The silence on the other end was thunderous. "Anyone else?" he finally repeated, his voice rising. "You're his grandmother. You're supposed to be our emergency contact. That was part of your so-called boundary document, wasn't it? Emergencies were accepted?" "Yes," I acknowledged. "And I recognize this is urgent. But I'm across town at an important function where I have responsibilities. I'm trying to help you find a solution that works for everyone." "Works for everyone?" Thomas's control finally snapped. "Do you hear yourself? This isn't about your precious boundaries or your suddenly important social life. This is family. Vanessa's mother is in the hospital, and you're worried about your gala?" The old guilt rose like a tide, the ingrained belief that any needs of mine were secondary, that family emergencies automatically trumped any commitment I might have made to myself or others. I closed my eyes, centering myself in the principles I had worked so hard to establish. "Thomas," I said quietly, "I can be there in approximately 90 minutes after my speech concludes. If that timing doesn't work for you, I suggest calling. The Petersons next door. Oliver has played with their son many times, and they've offered to help in the past." 90 minutes? The disbelief in his voice was palpable. "Her mother could be in surgery by then. I can't believe you're doing this, choosing some rich people charity event over your own family in crisis." The deliberate attempt to minimize my commitment, to frame it as frivolous socializing rather than the professional obligation it was, revealed how deeply the old patterns were ingrained. Despite 2 months of careful compliance, Thomas still fundamentally believed my time and priorities were less important than his. "I'm not choosing anything over family. I corrected him firmly. I'm acknowledging my existing commitment while offering the help I can reasonably provide. This isn't about the relative importance of a gala versus Vanessa's mother. It's about respect for all parties involved, including myself. There was a brief muffled exchange on his end, clearly conferring with Vanessa, before he returned to the line. Fine, he said coldly. We'll call the Petersons. Don't bother coming over later. We'll manage without you. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood in the hallway of the elegant venue, my hand still clutching my phone, a complex mixture of emotions washing through me. Guilt, certainty, regret, resolve, all swirling together in the aftermath of the first real test of my boundaries. Marian found me there a few minutes later. Everything all right? She asked, noting my expression. You're due to speak in 10 minutes. I gave her a brief summary of the conversation. She nodded thoughtfully. The first real test was always going to be painful, she observed. The question is, do you feel you made the right decision for the long-term health of your relationship, not just the immediate situation? I considered her question carefully before responding. Yes, I said finally. If I had abandoned my commitments at the first crisis, nothing would have changed. The pattern would have reset to its default. My needs subordinate to theirs, my boundaries flexible while theirs remain rigid. Marian squeezed my arm supportively. Then stand firm in your decision. Real change isn't comfortable. For any of you. 3 days passed without communication from Thomas or Vanessa following our confrontation over the emergency childcare. I maintained my routine, attending to my business interests and foundation work while wondering how Vanessa's mother was faring. Despite the tension, I was genuinely concerned about her well-being. On Saturday morning, I received a text from Oliver. Grandma, are we still having our Tuesday session? Dad hasn't said anything. The innocent message revealed much about the household dynamics. Thomas, in his anger, hadn't communicated with Oliver about our scheduled time together, either to confirm it was happening or to cancel it. The uncertainty was unfair to a child who had come to rely on our consistent routine. Absolutely, I texted back. 3 Saturday to you as usual. I've got a new project planned that I think you'll love. I then sent a separate message to Thomas. Oliver asked, About Tuesday. I've confirmed our regular session unless I hear otherwise from you. Hope Vanessa's mother is recovering well. The response came nearly an hour later. Tuesday is fine. Patricia has a hairline fracture. Surgery wasn't necessary, but she'll need rehab. Vanessa is staying with her through the weekend. The message was terse but informative. A small olive branch in its inclusion of details about Patricia's condition. I responded with genuine sympathy and an offer to reschedule our dinner that week to accommodate their disrupted plans. Thomas sent back a simple, thanks. Tuesday arrived with no further communication. At precisely 3 the concierge called to announce Thomas and Oliver had arrived. When they stepped off the elevator, the contrast between them was striking. Oliver bounded forward with his usual enthusiasm, while Thomas lingered back, his posture rigid, his expression carefully neutral. I'll pick him up at 6, he said, already stepping back toward the elevator. Thomas, I said quietly, do you have a moment before you go? I'd like to speak with you. He hesitated, clearly reluctant but unable to refuse without seeming petty. 5 minutes. I have calls to return. I turned to Oliver. Sweetheart, I've set up everything for our project in the office. Would you mind getting started with the instruction manual? I'll be there in just a moment. Once Oliver was out of earshot, I faced my son directly. I wanted to say I'm genuinely sorry about Patricia's injury. I know how difficult family health emergencies can be. Thomas's jaw tightened. Do you? Because, from where I was standing Wednesday night, your foundation gala seemed more important than our family emergency. I took a deep breath, refusing to be baited into defensiveness. I understand it felt that way to you, but I'd like you to consider something. If the situation were reversed, If you had an important work presentation and I called demanding immediate help, would you have abandoned your professional commitment without question? He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, the question clearly landing in a way my previous explanations hadn't. It's not the same, he finally said, though with less certainty. Work is different. Is it? I asked gently. My foundation. Work is as significant to me as your career is to you. It deserves the same respect, the same acknowledgement of importance. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood. Frustration mingled with reluctant consideration. You've changed, Mom. Sometimes I barely recognize you anymore. I haven't changed, Thomas. I've simply stopped, hiding parts of myself to make others comfortable. The woman I am now, confident, engaged with the community, clear about her boundaries, has always existed. She was just buried under years of trying to be only what you needed me to be. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving past me to take in the elegant penthouse, the evidence of the life I had created parallel to but separate from my role in his family. The Petersons were fine with Oliver, he said finally, a sideways acknowledgement that my suggested alternative had worked. Their son was thrilled to have an impromptu sleepover. I'm glad, I said simply. And I would have come after my speech if you had needed me. My boundaries aren't walls, Thomas. They're just clarifications of where I begin and end as a person. Something in his expression shifted. Not quite acceptance, but perhaps the first glimmer of genuine understanding. I should check on those calls, he said, stepping back into the elevator. But as the doors began to close, he added quietly, You were right about the mortgage. We should have been more responsible. I'm working on a better system now. The doors closed before I could respond, but his words echoed in the foyer. The first real acknowledgement not just of my financial help, but of his own responsibility in creating the situation that had required it. It wasn't an apology, not quite, but it was something perhaps more valuable. Evidence of reflection, of personal accountability. I found Oliver in my office, already deeply engaged with the robotics kit I had prepared. As I sat beside him, explaining the basic programming concepts that would bring our project to life, I felt a quiet hope settle alongside the complicated love I had always carried for my family. Perhaps with time and continued clarity, we could build something new together. Something based not on obligation and convenience, but on genuine respect for each other's complete humanity. It wouldn't be easy. Real change never was. But that small acknowledgement from Thomas suggested it might be possible. And for now, that was enough. 3 months after our revelatory dinner at Riverside Towers, I found myself sitting in my penthouse office reviewing the final details of my estate. Plan with Marion. The document represented not just the distribution of material assets, but the culmination of my journey toward self-reclamation. The trust for Oliver is structured exactly as you requested, Marion confirmed, sliding the papers across my desk. Educational expenses fully covered, with milestone distributions at 25, 30, and 35, each contingent on demonstrated fiscal responsibility and community engagement. I nodded, satisfied with the balanced approach. And Thomas's portion? A modest direct inheritance with the bulk placed in a managed trust. As you specified, he'll need to show 6 consecutive months of proper financial management before each distribution. The therapist requirement has been included as, well, that last provision had been the most difficult to decide. After careful consideration, I had made Thomas's larger distributions contingent on his completion of family therapy, not as punishment, but as investment in breaking generational patterns that had damaged our relationship. Do you think he'll fight it? I asked, signing where Marion indicated. She considered the question thoughtfully. Initially, perhaps, but the structure is sound. He receives tangible benefits regardless, with greater access possible through personal growth. It's fair. My phone chimed with a message from Thomas. Mom, is Thursday still good for our dinner? Vanessa's mom is joining us. She wants to thank you personally for the rehabilitation equipment you arranged. The message reflected the gradual warming that had developed since our confrontation over the emergency childcare. Thomas had been making consistent efforts, small but meaningful acknowledgments of my personhood beyond my role as his mother. Thursday works perfectly, I replied, looking forward to seeing Patricia. Glad the equipment is helping. As I set down my phone, Marion observed, He's trying. Yes, I agreed. In his way. It's progress, not perfection. After Marion left, I spent the afternoon preparing for an important transition, one I had been contemplating since the Revelation dinner, but had only recently decided to implement. My modest house, the one where I had raised Thomas, the one that had reinforced my image as a woman of limited means, was finally on the market. Letting go of that physical manifestation of my self-diminishment felt surprisingly emotional. That evening, I walked through the empty rooms one final time, running my fingers along familiar walls, standing in doorways where I had watched my son grow from toddler to man. In Thomas's old bedroom, now stripped of furniture but still bearing the faint outline where basketball posters had once hung, I allowed myself a moment of honest reflection. Had my choices, hiding my success, prioritizing his needs above my identity, truly served him? Or had they contributed to the entitled man he had become? The answer wasn't simple. I had made my decisions with love, believing I was protecting him from the potential corrosion of inherited wealth. But in hiding my true self, I had inadvertently taught him that mothers, that women, existed primarily in service to others, their own accomplishments secondary or invisible. That pattern would end with me. Oliver would grow up seeing his grandmother as whole and complete, successful, boundary-respecting, generous but not exploitable. The following evening, Thomas, Vanessa, and Oliver came to the penthouse for our now regular Thursday dinner. Patricia joined us, moving carefully with her walker but clearly improving. The conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years. Genuine questions about my foundation work, Oliver's animated descriptions of our latest projects, even Vanessa sharing challenges at the hospital with newfound openness. As dessert was served, I decided the moment had come. I have some news, I said, setting down my fork. I've sold the house. Thomas's spoon froze halfway to his mouth. What? When? The closing was yesterday. It was time. But he struggled visibly with this new development. That's been your home for 30 years. Where will you go? I gestured to the space around us. I already live here, Thomas. This has been my actual home for months now. Something in his expression shifted. A final letting go of the image he had held of me for so long. It's really permanent then, this new arrangement. It's not an arrangement, I corrected gently. It's my life. My authentic life that I hid for too long. Oliver, perceptive as always, asked the question hiding beneath his father's reaction. Does this mean you're not going back to the way things were before? Ever? That's right, sweetheart, I confirmed. We're moving forward, not backward. But forward can be better than before if we build it together with honesty. Later, as the family prepared to leave, Thomas lingered behind while Vanessa helped Patricia to the elevator. The house sale must have brought in a good amount, he observed, his tone carefully neutral. The old Thomas might have been calculating his potential claim on those funds. The new Thomas, I hoped, was simply making conversation. It did, I acknowledged. The proceeds are being directed to the Foundation's scholarship program. He nodded slowly. That seems fitting. After a pause, he added, I've been meaning to ask, would the Foundation be interested in pro bono marketing support? My firm has been looking to build our portfolio in the nonprofit sector. I studied his face, searching for the entitled expectation of the past, but found instead something closer to genuine offering, a desire to contribute value rather than extract it. The board would certainly consider a proposal, I said. We have a meeting next Tuesday if you'd like to prepare something. As he joined his family at the elevator, I felt a quiet certainty settle over me. The exit from my old life, from the diminished version of myself I had maintained for decades, was complete. Not with drama or recrimination, but with dignity and clear-eyed purpose. The door closed behind them, and I stood alone in my beautiful penthouse, finally fully at home, not just in the space, but in myself. A year had passed since that pivotal family dinner at Riverside Towers. The seasons had cycled through their eternal rhythm, and with them, my life had settled into a new pattern, one built on authenticity rather than accommodation, on mutual respect rather than exploitation. My penthouse no longer felt like a bold statement of independence, but simply home. A place that reflected who I truly was rather than who I had pretended to be for decades. The artwork I had collected over the years, once hidden in storage to maintain my modest facade, now adorned, walls that had been designed to showcase them properly. My office hummed with activity as I had embraced my business interests with renewed vigor, no longer compartmentalizing that aspect of my identity. The Westside Community Foundation had flourished under my guidance, its endowment growing substantially, due to investment strategies I had implemented. The scholarship program, funded largely from the proceeds of my former house, had already helped 12 promising students from underprivileged backgrounds attend university. Each time I received their progress reports, I felt a quiet satisfaction deeper than any I had experienced during my years of invisible support for Thomas's family. Most significantly, my relationships had transformed. Oliver and I had maintained our scheduled Tuesday and Thursday sessions, which had evolved beyond simple projects into meaningful mentorship. At 12, he was showing remarkable aptitude for engineering and environmental science, interests I nurtured with resources, connections, and genuine engagement. He no longer saw me as just his grandmother, the convenient helper who appeared when needed, but as a person with knowledge to share, a life worth understanding, a model of integrity he could aspire to emulate. Thomas and Vanessa had adjusted to our new dynamic with varying degrees of grace. Vanessa, ever practical, had adapted more quickly, moving from resentment to grudging respect as she observed how I conducted myself in business and philanthropic circles. She had even begun consulting me on her own career advancement at the hospital, recognizing that my decades of navigating male-dominated industries offered insights valuable to her own professional journey. Thomas's evolution had been more complicated, but ultimately more profound. The initial shock and defensiveness had gradually given way to something resembling genuine introspection. He had surprised me by actually following through on the family therapy sessions I had suggested, initially attending alone, before eventually bringing Vanessa. Their financial situation had stabilized, not through my continued subsidies, but through their own improved management practices and realigned priorities. Most remarkably, Thomas had followed through on his offer to provide marketing support to the foundation. What had begun as a tentative proposal had developed into a substantial pro bono partnership that benefited both the foundation and his firm. Seeing my son apply his professional skills to meaningful work rather than just client acquisition had revealed a dimension of him I had feared was lost, the compassionate, purpose-driven child I had raised before entitlement had calcified around him. On the anniversary of our revelatory dinner, I invited the family to a similar private dining room at Riverside Towers. This time, there were no shocking disclosures planned, no boundaries to establish, no painful truths to unveil. It was simply a celebration of how far we had come, and an acknowledgement of the journey still ahead. As we enjoyed our meal, Thomas raised his glass in an unexpected toast. "To Mom," he said, his voice carrying an emotional weight I hadn't heard in years. Who had the courage to show us the truth, not just about her success, but about what real love looks like. Not endless sacrifice that enables bad behavior, but honest boundaries that challenge us to be better. The words washed over me, a balm to the wounds that had been slowly healing over this transformative year. Not because I needed his validation, I had moved beyond that dependency, but because they represented a genuine shift in understanding that would serve him well long after I was gone. Later that evening, after the family had departed and I stood alone on my balcony watching the city lights, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain had been necessary, the confrontation, the establishment of boundaries, the willingness to be temporarily misunderstood for the sake of lasting change. But the rewards had exceeded my most optimistic hopes. I had reclaimed not just my fortune, but something far more precious: my authentic self, my dignity, my right to be seen and valued for all that I was, not merely what I could provide to others. And in doing so, I had offered my son and grandson a priceless gift: the opportunity to know and love the real Elena Vasquez, businesswoman, philanthropist, investor, and yes, mother and grandmother too. A complete human being worthy of respect, not because of her financial worth, but because of her inherent dignity as a person who could no longer be reduced to a convenient role in someone else's story. The transformation was complete. Not perfect. Family. Relationships never are, but genuine and lasting. I had rewritten not just my own narrative, but the legacy I would eventually leave behind. And that, beyond any financial inheritance, was what would truly matter in the end.